So finally, World Cup qualifying is complete. 48 nations now know where they're playing and who they're playing across Mexico, the United States, and Canada in a couple of months' time. But I've got to say, this is probably the World Cup that I am least looking forward to. And really, it's down to one man, President Trump. But before we get into the political element of this, I think it's just worth looking at the fact that, I mean, since the qualifications have now been known, there's been a lot of debate on social media about around the footballing element of the expansion of the World Cup and in terms of who should and shouldn't be there. Now, I personally, I'm not really for the expansion of the World Cup, but I would still watch it. Um, you know, the only issue I've got with the expansion, it's not the fact that I don't think other teams deserve to be there. I just think you're trying to cram so many games in. And when you then have groups where, three teams are going to qualify, and I just think the World Cup is becoming overpopulated. Now, obviously, I've seen the arguments against it, and that's fair enough, but that's not a reason why I would not want to watch the World Cup. Obviously, being English, the match times are not brilliant. Most of England games are 9 o'clock at night, I believe, our time, but a lot of the games, are going to be past midnight, even to like 3, 4 in the morning. And one of the things I loved about the World Cup growing up, and I still do, is watching games between nations that I'd never normally go out of my way to watch. So, although the times the games are on, it's not great from a European audience. We have to remember this is the World Cup; it's not the European Championships. So, and the great thing about the World Cup is it does move around. It doesn't just stay obviously in Europe or South America like it used to. You know, kind of since 2002, they've obviously really broadened it, and that's great. That's part of what the World Cup should be. But I've seen a lot of debate again about the times, etc., the heat, and the heat. So again, that's it doesn't not make me want to watch the World Cup. We've had some. There's obviously one glaring omission that's not going to the World Cup again, which is Italy. Now, I find this, a younger generation might find this as the norm because Italy have, qualified or haven't qualified, should I say, for the 2018 World Cup, 2022 World Cup, and now this one. Whereas when I was growing up, my first World Cup was USA '94 that I fully remember, and obviously Italy were finalists. Obviously, the 2006 World Cup stands out because they won it, but every tournament that Italy went into, they were one of the favourites because of the strength of Serie A. So to see their decline and them not being there for someone like me and many other people, you feel that Italy should be there, but you've got to win your games, and obviously they haven't. But the reason I'm not looking forward to this World Cup is because President Trump and Iran, and I cannot believe there is not more talk about this, because I cannot think of a World Cup that has ever had a host nation attacking another nation taking part in the World Cup leading up to it. So there's been some very political and controversial World Cups in the past. 1978, obviously before I was born, but that stands out in the history of World Cups because the ruling Argentinian junta put on a tournament but was doing incredible harm to their own people, mass killings, etc. So that's, I think, the closest a World Cup has come, but they were attacking their own people, and that obviously that's not right, but I cannot remember a World Cup that has been anything like this. Even if you go to the 1936 Olympics that was under the Nazis and Adolf Hitler, all of their, yes, they'd started to do certain things, but most of their things, invasion of other countries, the Holocaust, etc., was to come. So what I'm concerned about here is, one, it's not being talked enough. So on social media this week, since the qualifiers have finished, a lot of people are posting World Cup memories. They're having debates of should the World Cup have been expanded, but there is not enough talk going on about what the United States is doing with Iran. And it's not just Iran, because he's literally only yesterday, he's belittling Britain, he's belittling France. And however much you want to keep football and politics to one side, obviously you can't. You know, we saw with the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, you know, talking about you know, rights for people and what Qatar felt was right and what other countries felt was right. So there was obviously big arguments about wearing that, you know, the pride emblem or pride captain's armbands and things like that. You know, Russia in 2018. Now, while they put on a good tournament, they'd already made their mark in Ukraine. Yes, they hadn't invaded, but they'd already taken the Crimea. You know, so there's been a lot of political World Cups. You know, even America versus Iran. I remember 1998 when they played in the group stage. Now, they weren't at war, but the diplomatic relations were low, very low. And I remember that game joking at school with, oh, well, you know, they're going to bomb each other, kind of. So I remember the politics around that game, but they weren't at war. Obviously, they played again each other in 2022 in Qatar, and again there was elements around that, but again they weren't at war. So the first, obviously, the example is, you know, Iran going to play in the United States. Now, you know, I believe Gianni Infantino said they're not going to move Iran's games, and I think what staggers me is if the Americans use combat troops, which they may or may not do, because you can't tell with Trump what he's going to do. The more American casualties increase, I would fear for the safety of the Iranian team. I'm not saying they're all Americans, but if you've lost, you know, a son or an uncle or a dad in that war, either, you know, on the ground or whatever, and then Iran's coming to your city, I don't know. I just don't feel comfortable. And then he's then obviously, you know, he's digging at his the allies, obviously the English, you know, the French. I think he's had a dig at quite a few others. I'm just not comfortable with this World Cup, especially as back in December, FIFA awarded him, you know, the Peace Prize. I'm going to quote Infantino here. This is, you know, he said, "This is what we want from a leader that cares about people. We want to live in a safe world, in a safe environment. We want to unite. That's what we do here today. That's what we'll do at the FIFA World Cup, Mr. President." I mean, honestly, giving him a peace award and then he's literally inflamed tensions in Iran. Obviously, Israel is right alongside him. I'm just staggered that not more conversation is happening about this World Cup. Now, I know, you know, I know they can't just pick the World Cup up and move it to somewhere else. You know that I get that. You have to move, give the next nation a year down the line. So, for example, when Russia invaded the Ukraine, they moved the Champions League final that year from St. Petersburg to Paris, I believe it was. So, but that was just one game. I get that you cannot move a whole World Cup, but honestly, I'm worried that this World Cup is going to be a lot more political, and I'm just frustrated that not enough people are talking about this. And I almost wish the football world, as in the players and the coaches, would go, no, we're not playing it. We're not playing it in the United States. Because, you know, this war, you know, whatever Trump says, he changes day to day, or it's going to be over in 2 to 3 weeks. There's a deal on the table, but doesn't say who's, you know, from the Iranian side, who's making that deal. And if history has taught the United States and anyone anything, is, you know, when you are being bombed and there's no ground troops, you've just got to hold out. And I know it's not nice for the Iranian people, but that would constitute victory. And at this moment in time, I don't see how Trump is going to get out of this war in the way he wants. And I don't see that this is going to, you know, be, even if the military side has ended by the time the World Cup starts, you don't just forget. And I think more people need to be talking about this. And I'd almost prefer to, keep the people who've qualified, but boycott the World Cup and move it to somewhere else. And if we have to delay it a year, then so be it. Now, of course, it's not that simple. As I said, it's not just moving a tournament, it's the whole football calendar, it's everything. But I'm just not comfortable with this World Cup. So, as I say, I can deal with the increase in teams. I can deal with the times. I can deal with Italy not being there. I can deal with almost anything. But this World Cup and what Trump is doing in Iran is going too far. And I think this World Cup, just in general, is going to be probably off-field the worst. And I think it will affect the on-field. Iran and are playing Egypt. That I'm not quite sure where Egypt is standing in this current Middle Eastern conflict, but again, I'm just not comfortable with this World Cup. So that's why I wanted to do this video today. I think more people should be talking about this. I get that. It's big in terms of what's happened on the pitch this week, in terms of who's qualified, who's not qualified. And there's some, small nations are going to be making their first appearances. That's fantastic. But, this is a first in football history. We've never had a host nation attacking another nation. Now, even Putin wasn't this stupid to do this with Russia. He puts the tournament on, gives a false impression to the outside world of what Russia looked like, and then obviously continued his Ukraine element until he eventually invaded. I mean, even Putin wouldn't have been this stupid. And I just don't. I'm not saying Trump should put the FIFA World Cup before anything, but yeah, I say no more. Except you watching this, we need to make more noise about this. So I'll leave it there. It's not my usual video. Obviously, I'll do my best to watch the World Cup. When it's on, unfortunately, I'm not going to get to see every game. But yeah, I'm not looking forward to this World Cup at all.